So I seem to be hearing about growth hormones all over the place now, to the point where they're almost ubiquitous, when it seems like just a few years ago, they were the world's best kept secret almost. Why do you think there's a reason for this sudden incredible rise in popularity?
Growth hormone is the actual third agent that we talked about that will help in your arsenal of tools to promote healing and recovery. But then it also has an impact positively on the immune system. It also plays a role in cognitive prowess and cognitive function too as well. Skin elasticity, skin tightening.
I want to get into your personal experience with growth hormone peptides, when you started, whether you did it right or wrong, what happened, what type of results. Of course, now I'm sure it's vastly different. And then, of course, patient results. Getting into the mechanisms of action and what's happening inside of the body with these growth hormone secretagogues and what makes them different from the exogenous GH that we talked about already.
What does growth hormone do? So growth hormone has a large pool of different mechanisms that it sort of plays its hand in. And this is why they've always called it the fountain of youth, because look at all the various things it does. It enhances muscular growth. Muscle mass and protein intake seems to be the new kid on the block, and rightfully so. I want to really drive this home. A lot of supplements are going to talk about aiding muscle mass, but what makes growth hormone different?
So I seem to be hearing about growth hormones all over the place now, to the point where they're almost ubiquitous, when it seems like just a few years ago, they were the world's best kept secret almost. Why do you think there's a reason for this sudden incredible rise in popularity?
Yeah, I think there's many pieces to this. Number one, just peptide therapy as a whole. While that's been around for a while, just like growth hormone peptides, growth hormone peptides were one of the first peptides. Really, we have to thank the bodybuilders for self-experimentation with themselves. But yeah, I think one big piece of growth hormone peptide popularity is just the fact that peptide therapy as a whole is really starting to move, and people are really starting to recognize, despite adequate human data for us to feel like we can say and claim that they're very safe and efficacious, even though we know peptide therapy is extremely safe. There's an overwhelming amount of anecdotal data. Probably at this point, millions of people use peptides and they're freaking amazing. The side effect, I have yet to see anybody report any sort of issues. But growth hormone peptide, in addition to just the explosion with regular peptides, you have to remember, like, growth hormone itself is, we've always called it the fountain of youth, right? Mm-hmm. And despite the complications, despite the issues, growth hormone's amazing. And we're going to get into all the benefits of increasing growth hormone levels, but utilizing exogenous growth hormone. So let's be clear. We could have, and this applies to hormones or peptides, we can have endogenous versus exogenous, right? So endogenous means produced within, and exogenous means come from external, right? So using exogenous growth hormone has some issues, has some concerns and complications. The very, very common side effect is carpal tunnel. And what's so crazy about carpal tunnel is as annoying as that problem is, people sometimes would report that until they felt carpal tunnel, they weren't satisfied, meaning they wanted to produce carpal tunnel just to know that what they were getting was legit, right? Because a lot of these people were getting black market growth hormone and, all sorts of crazy stuff out there. So that's more of an annoying side effect. But the more concerning issue with growth hormone exogenous usage was insulin resistance. And that, to me, is so paradoxical, because when you think about what growth hormone does, and we're going to get into all of it, but you would not think the effects of growth hormone would produce insulin resistance, because it enhances lipolysis, it enhances fat burning, it improves muscular hypertrophy and growth. And so, very paradoxical. Nobody really knows, because when we look at growth hormone, not even the peptides, but just growth hormone, we don't have enough human data. So we don't know. This is again anecdotal, but a lot of anecdotal evidence shows that long-term use of exogenous growth hormone, people develop insulin resistance. And that's a pathway towards all cause mortality. And, the explosion of these GLP-1 medications, and how much we're seeing that they help because they make a person more insulin sensitive, which is synonymous with reducing insulin resistance, really just drives that point that insulin resistance is a huge issue. And so we want to avoid that. And so to me, as amazing as the benefits are for growth hormone, I think the complication of insulin resistance long term deters me from ever touching that. Even though I do see some anecdotal reports of people being able to use it safely, I think this answers the question that you asked, why has growth hormone peptides exploded? I think because now we have a solution that avoids the risks and complications that we know, at least anecdotally, that exogenous growth hormone gives us, because now we have peptides that can stimulate the release of our own growth hormone. And that's amazing. And anecdotally, we don't see any of those complications that we were seeing from exogenous growth hormone. So I think that's it. I think those two may be magnified by the fact that now we're talking about a peptide that's working directly on your physique. And we know fat loss peptides are probably the most popular peptides out of all of them. And this peptide finds itself in the fat loss category too as well.
Gotcha. And I know what you're talking about the concern over exogenous growth hormone. And we talked about it briefly once before, that famous picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Conquer poster where he's in front of the crowd and he's huge, he's massive and he's lean, but he has a caved in six pack and his belly is narrow. Now you flash forward a few years, you look at Jay Cutler, you look at Ronnie Coleman, and you'll notice they're huge, even a little bit bigger, but they have these turtle shells. They have the definition, but their guts are distended, and you find out about the effect of super physiological levels of GH and what it does for organ growth. And so I hear you when you're saying we have this amazing peptide now that is giving you the benefits of exogenous GH without the negatives. So this started in fitness, we know that, about 20 years ago, but now it seems like anyone who's into functional health or a healthy lifestyle in general, anyone who wants to feel better, live healthier, this goes beyond picking up heavy stuff and putting it down and just physique changes. So why is it going so far beyond the fitness community now?
I think anti-aging is, such a vast molecular medicine, anti-aging, holistic and wellness therapies. I mean, we can call it whatever you want to call it, but essentially looking to optimization health, right? Looking to optimize and improve our health, right? Achieving optimal health is synonymous with getting our bodies to function the best they possibly can. And when we were younger, we had higher levels of growth hormone, and our growth hormone levels decline. And with the decline of growth hormone comes decreases in muscle mass, increases of fat mass. Just to focus on those two for example. And with the decline of muscle mass and increase of fat mass comes along deterioration of our health. Deterioration. And so keeping those levels optimized, not supraphysiological, but optimal, does seem, at least hypothetically, right? Because again, we need more data, but it seems to produce not only a life where an individual feels more optimal, but they actually live longer, and they will live longer with a higher quality of life. The longevity is there because we know, and we do have research on this part, right? Not from the growth hormone side, but just having more muscle mass. I mean, holy cow. There was a massive study that just came out. It was actually a meta-analysis looking at all the randomized control studies, which is our highest piece of clinical data. And just to summarize it point blank, you will live longer the more muscle mass you have on your body, like period. And so I think that's very telling. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Because for example, one common cause of death for elderly, is a fall and breaking the hip. And when they break their hip, they can't move as well. They're not as sociable. And so now we got mental disorders that can develop.
Break in the first place.
Assuming they even recover from the begin with, which the amount of muscle mass they have is also going to affect their recovery. But yeah, we have this compilation of both physiological, emotional and mental effects, either positive or negative, because of the lifestyle that you can or can't live with the amount of muscle mass you have on your body. So, I mean, this is huge, and the list goes on. So, I think that quality of life, longevity, optimal health, all of these are part and parcel for what many of us would like to strive for. We're not getting it from the healthcare system. Fortunately, I don't want to say we never will, because that sounds pessimistic, but we're far from that point. I mean, the healthcare system, we've talked about that already. I mean, it's failing us all miserably. For anybody outside of that acute trauma care situation. And it's a recipe for waiting till you get sick. And yeah, anyways, we've gone over all that. So people are looking to take matters into their own hands, looking to take responsibility, as I think they should, for their health. And I think growth hormone is a vital piece. These growth hormone peptides are a vital piece. They're not the first piece by all means. They're not the first piece that I would look for. And we have patients that sometimes are obese or overweight, and they want to start growth hormone peptides. We have to have this conversation with them, like, oh, let's slow down. You're very, very inflamed. You're very overweight. You have a high amount of body fat percentage. Let's focus on this part first. Can growth hormone peptides be utilized with them? Of course, just like testosterone. But just like testosterone, growth hormone as well, it just won't work as well unless we are at least starting simultaneously better lifestyle choices. And so if we are going to do that, that's when these peptides, that's when a lot of these medicines really shine. And I think the only one that should be at the conversation, let me rephrase that. The one that should always be at the conversation in the beginning would be the GLP-1 medications. And we'll probably do a separate podcast just talking about GLP-1s, I'm sure. But growth hormone certainly needs at least the lifestyle being with it, if you want to consider having it in the beginning, but it also can be a great adjunct to add later down the road. And, for us with our patients, we usually don't even add the growth hormone peptides till they get, a certain amount into their fat loss goals. So.
Right. And I'm going to say this now so I don't forget, because I think it'll be fun. I want to get into your personal experience with growth hormone peptides, when you started, whether you did it right or wrong, what happened, what type of results. Of course, now I'm sure it's vastly different. And then, of course, patient results, what you've seen there. But before that, getting into the mechanisms of action and what's happening inside of the body with these growth hormone secretagogues, and what makes them different from the exogenous GH that we talked about already.
Okay. So personally, I would say my ability to retain muscle mass is the biggest change that I noticed. I probably did my first cycle of growth hormone peptides maybe like 2-3 years ago, ran a solid cycle, took a break, and didn't continued on as well. So I'd say probably all in all is about 6 to 9 months in total throughout that year. And I've always had good muscle building genetics. So, I've unfortunately have really good fat building genetics as well. So I'm that endomorphic, mesomorphic body type. But despite being able to put on muscle mass, I would also lose it relatively fast. Because now I see like the difference. It takes it's a much bigger effort for me to really start wasting away, and really I'd have to pretty much stop training entirely, for 3 to 6 weeks to really notice that atrophy set in. And I don't have to lift as much now to maintain. So that to me was the biggest difference. For a lot of patients though, because my health was already in order, a high amount of metabolic health. For a lot of other patients, and this applies to many different peptides and many different modalities in the holistic space that kind of have a far sweeping set of improvements, you're going to you're going to notice whatever is sort of deficient in you, right? Like the particular testosterone, a man starts testosterone therapy, there's 10, 15 different categories, but they always talk about one or two because that's the one that was a ruin for their life. That's the one that was plaguing their quality of life. So that's more of a reality on an individual basis. But yeah, for me, that's what I've noticed as the biggest change for me.
Okay. And then the mechanisms, what's happening in the body, what makes this different than the exogenous GH?
Absolutely. So just to kind of recap, exogenous with the growth hormone, an individual is just injecting growth hormone into their body, and growth hormone is doing what they do. So what it does. So let's talk about that. What does growth hormone do? Growth hormone has and then we'll get into peptides. So growth hormone has a large pool of different mechanisms that it sort of plays its hand in. And this is why they've always called it the fountain of youth, because look at all the various things it does. It enhances muscular growth. And I just want to talk about muscular growth for a second, because I mentioned it to me. Enhancing muscle growth is important to say, but I think to give it justice, we need to get into this particular one a little bit more specifically, especially now because there's so much, like we just talked about earlier. If you guys watching this have noticed, there's been a lot more discussion, like the way fasting was all in the news, and fasting still is. Muscle mass and protein intake seems to be the new kid on the block, and rightfully so. So I want to really drive this home. A lot of supplements are going to talk about aiding muscle mass, but what makes growth hormone different? It's got this very special process in addition to hypertrophy. So hypertrophy is the medical term for increase in muscle size, specifically the muscle fibers, right? So a muscle is just a bunch of strings, and then those strings can be broken down into more strings, and then those strings can be broken down into even smaller strings, and you get all the way down to what's called actin and myosin. And so when you train, you're actually breaking down those actin and myosin filaments, and it's that stress reaction that then has these muscular stem cells, if you will, that cause the promotion of growth, and they increase in size. But the number of muscle fibers is pretty much set after puberty, right? And so hyperplasia is the medical term that refers to an increase in the muscle size, in the muscle numbers, right? In the number of cells. And so growth hormone sort of opens up a new door to growth. And, that picture you talked about earlier, comparing, but you were talking about just comparing Arnold to today's bodybuilders, but there's a classic picture that this comparison happens. And we're not even talking about the GH belly. We're just talking about the size. The size is huge. The potential, I don't think anybody would argue that these guys today are training way harder than Arnold did. I think it's possible to say Arnold maybe even trained harder. Who knows? I can't, watch Pump and Iron and man, that guy trained like a beast. So, but I think there was a genetic cap, even with anabolic steroids. But now we have these growth hormone peptides, and this just sort of changes the playing field, if you will, and raises that genetic cap, because that is a genetic cap based thing, is how many muscle fibers you have, and then also how well they grow, how much they stay in growth phase. And so growth hormone itself has this pronounced effect. And so what's interesting about it, though, is if you just did growth hormone, and we're probably going to do another podcast talking about testosterone, it's a very, very powerful, but slow for an individual to notice, because you can dramatically increase the number of muscle fibers, but they're still extremely tiny. Unperceivable. But now 3 months, 6 months, 9 months of training afterwards, when those muscle cells, those newly added ones, can develop and actually reach a size somewhat parallel to the muscle fiber, now you've actually reached. So you don't get that dramatic impact. And we unfortunately have to tell a lot of men this when they call us. They're like, for whatever many reasons, they don't want to get into testosterone therapy, but they want to go on growth hormone because they think in their heads testosterone is bad because they've been brainwashed, and growth hormone is safe. And, growth hormone peptides are really safe, and we're going to talk about that. But then we have to tell them the sad news of like, hey, man, this is great, but your testosterone levels are also pretty low. So, that immediate effect of looking bigger in the gym, a much better pump, is actually going to happen faster with testosterone. Now, if you want the sweet spot, you do both. That's where the magic really happens, is having your testosterone levels optimized and stacking that with growth hormone. But we'll have a whole muscle episode, I'm sure, as well. But so that's one benefit, right? Muscle mass. But then growth hormone also helps with fat loss. It's very active in the mobilization of body fat, and mobilization of body fat is, to me, very, very important. The mobilization is not the actual stimulus that causes fat loss and weight loss. That's a calorie deficit. Like, we know that, right? If your hormones are humming in the right direction, not cross signaling the other way, a calorie deficit is going to produce fat loss. But when you have an increased mobilization of fat, free fatty acids paired up with your calorie deficit, now you have this protein sparing effect, this muscle preservation effect, because weight loss is always going to have some inherent amount of muscle mass loss. That's, even bodybuilders will tell you that, unless they're mid-cycle of a bunch of crazy agents. Like, you're not doing both at the same time. You're trying to maximize fat loss, minimize muscle mass loss. That's the game. But one thing to help that ratio is indirectly by mobilizing more body fat. So you mobilize more body fat, your body is going to be less inclined to break down muscle mass to meet the calorie demands of the calorie deficit. So fat loss is enhanced. Those two, I think, are the biggest reasons why people are getting into this space. But it also, it plays a major role in recovery and healing, not just the muscles, but more importantly, cartilaginous material, cartilaginous tissue. So now that's a big deal, because that's longevity, that's aging. A lot of men and women are unable to continue training at the level that they want to or need to or have to because of injuries, right? Whether it be injuries from the gym itself, or injuries because they have a lifestyle that they want to live. Yours truly, I love volleyball, and that's my jam. And I've dealt with injuries that have kept me out of both the gym and or the field. So growth hormone peptides are certainly not the most powerful healing peptides. We actually did our episode talking about TB500 and BPC 157, but growth hormone can actually that is the actual third agent that we talked about that will help in your arsenal of tools to promote healing and recovery. But that it also has an impact positively on the immune system. It also plays a role in cognitive prowess and cognitive function too, as well. Skin elasticity, skin tightening. Again, I wouldn't sell this as a program to somebody like, this is going to tighten your skin. And I get very frustrated when I see people that are being sold a bill of goods. But the very few things can actually have a direct impact on elastin. GHK copper is, that's a direct peptide that can do that. But outside of that, increasing growth hormone levels will have a positive impact on skin health. So, really, when we're looking at optimizing our health, overall longevity and wellness, growth, I would be remiss to not include growth hormone onto the table alongside testosterone and alongside a bunch of awesome lifestyle choices to deliver the best level of health to an individual who's over 30. Who's over 30.
To
I was
all-cause
saying,
mortality muscle mass really is, and not just general muscle mass. We know grip strength is tied to all-cause mortality. Bone density, which is directly related to muscle mass, is tied to all-cause mortality. Even how long you can do a full hang, which is, of course, another form of grip and core strength. It's really everything when it comes to living longer and just fighting disease, metabolic health. So when we look at the peptide versus the exogenous form, what differences are we seeing there?
Hey guys, I wanted to interrupt for a quick minute. I have a free guide for you to get you towards GLP-1 independence. This is phenomenal. If you've already started or you're thinking about started, I break down step by step exactly what you need to do to graduate towards GLP-1 medication independence. I'll link to it in the show notes. We'll see you guys back in the show.
So this is what's really cool. When you are utilizing growth hormone peptides, you are still getting that effect of increasing growth hormone. And that's ultimately what we want. So when we talk about the effects, we're talking about the effects of growth hormone on the body. But What's different, right, and getting into the mechanisms now, is we are not putting exogenous growth hormone into the body, right? And, exogenous hormones in general, that's a whole other conversation. You see it with testosterone therapy, which is why you have to continue, because there's a feedback system, and that usually decreases your body's own natural endogenous production. And so growth hormone itself, you have that concern when you take it exogenously, impacting your own natural production. But when we look at peptide therapy, and I'm not saying this can't happen with growth hormone peptides. In fact, we just don't have enough data, but it would make sense that it's not happening to the degree, because this is one of the many reasons why we're not getting nearly as much of the negative consequences that we get from the exogenous growth hormone. So we are essentially releasing our own natural growth hormone. So I think to better understand this, let's just kind of dive into, where growth hormone comes from. So growth hormone is produced and stored in the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is the master gland in our brain, specifically housed kind of, between central and frontal cortex, about a pea-sized powerhouse gland, and actually stores all of our growth hormone. So when we talk about growth hormone levels decreasing in the body,
Yeah.
well, growth hormone is stored in the pituitary gland. It's not that the storage is decreasing and the body's going, oh my God, I have this finite amount of growth hormone and I better slow down the release. That's not what's happening. Growth hormone itself is signaled to release. And this is just so, when you pick up a physiology book, specifically endocrinology, and you see the insane cascade and pathway of like, well, testosterone's over here, but why is there so many other precursors? This releases that, the gonadotropins are stimulating the production for, that's sort of your initial release. Those gonadotropins, that's tier one. Then we get down to the productions of luteinizing hormones and follicular stimulating hormones, which is sort of tier two. Still not at the testes yet, still not at testosterone. And then finally, those hormones can then stimulate the Leydig cells in the testosterone in the testes, for example, in men to produce testosterone. So why is there such a dramatic set of steps? And it really does give you so much appreciation for the insane design, because having so many paths in place give the body an insane amount of flexibility to make adjustments and tweaks and handle and balance and react. And because if it was just directly one path, one production, that doesn't give you as much variability to slow things and turn them down. So this is just an amazing thing that I like to sidetrack on. But anyways, getting back to growth hormone. So your brain actually has these, specifically the hypothalamus, which is like the relay station, will actually release these peptides, these peptides and hormones. And I want to be clear, because these they're different. A peptide is different than a hormone, yet they're used very interchangeably. And I think that really gets into the nuance and minutia that's really not necessary. So call it a peptide, call it a hormone.
You're talking about?
Yes, because they're still having a net effect of a signaling. They're signaling a process to happen. Generally speaking, hormones are more longer lasting as they float around the bloodstream. Peptides tend to degrade pretty quickly. That's one difference, but I'm not a scientist myself, and so I know there's a tremendous amount of additional differentiating factors. But for all intents and purposes, they function very similarly, and that's usually how I explain peptides anyways. Is like you've heard of a hormone. Well, basically peptides are more or less the same thing. So we have these, and so we categorize them because there's many of them. Growth hormone secretagogues, right? Secretagogue, causing the secretion of. So when your body wants to release growth hormone, which by the way happens as more of a, for men, it's more of a pulsatile release. And the biggest pulse is when we get into deep sleep, that first amount of deep sleep, because when you sleep, you have more deep sleep in the earlier parts of the nights. And then as you progress throughout your sleep, you have less deep sleep and more dreamlike, REM-like sleep. And so less growth hormone. So the majority of your growth hormone is pulsed in that first round of deep sleep. And the way it's pulsed, the way it's secreted and released, is through the stimulation of those growth hormone secretagogues, which were released from the hypothalamus, attached to the pituitary, and cause that release. So what's actually declining when we say growth hormone levels are declining as we age is the growth hormone secretagogues. Those are declining, and there's a lot of natural ways that we can improve our own, and we should definitely talk about those. Improve our own secretagogues as well, because if you do that, you're going to increase your own natural growth hormone release. But that's what these peptides are doing, and look, all peptides as a whole, that's what they're doing. And that's why this whole field is so amazing, because we're just enhancing a natural signal. And these particular signals have profound effects in many cases, like growth hormone, because we just talked about all the things that growth hormone can do. One single class of peptides can cause the pituitary to dump a certain amount of growth hormone, and an individual can benefit. So that's a very different process, right, than just skipping all that and injecting direct growth hormone, right? And like I said, unless I come across some new clinical data, I just don't see any reason to ever use exogenous growth hormone. I never have, I never will, as long as I have access to these peptides.
Okay, so you've covered why we want to use these peptides over the exogenous growth hormone. Now, kind of getting into what's available out there, where do you get them? And just from what I know with growth hormones recently, you have your tesamorelin, you have samamorelin, but it seems as though there's been some funny business between the FDA and CJC ipamorelin. But when is there not funny business between peptides and FDA, right? So what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, this is the second time the FDA has done what they do, which is help the public, right? I think that's what the FDA is trying to do. And so by helping the public, by removing these dangerous peptides. So, but look, I mean, in their defense, we need more data. We need more human data on these peptides. Why the human data is not being done, that's a whole nother conversation that I'll just leave right there. So, there's a ton of peptides that have actually been banned for quite a long time. There's a lot of them. Growth hormone, GHRH2, GHRH6, hexarelin. There's a lot. These ones are definitely more popular and prominent in the bodybuilding arena because they stimulate a ton of appetite. But for your average individual, that's the last thing we want, is stimulating a bunch of appetite. So ipamorelin was an amazing peptide. Unfortunately, we don't have access to it anymore because it was on the recent ban list. And so it was commonly paired with CJC 1295, and the combination of both. One of them is a GHRH, one of them is a GHRP. Ipamorelin is the P, meaning a growth hormone releasing peptide versus a growth hormone releasing hormone. Again, getting into the nuance between the hormone versus peptide, really not important for this podcast, but they're growth hormone secretagogues. So you can't get those anymore. Now, before we get to what you can get and what you should be paying attention to, I want to segue to what to stay away from, because some people watching this might be, well, I can order CJC right now.
Yeah.
If you're ordering that CJC 1295 or any other peptides from a research company, then you need to inform yourself on the true reality of that market and the dangers associated. Look, I respect individuals from a cost perspective. If that's all you can afford, you're taking matters into your own hands. I'm not shunning you in any way. I've been saying this for quite some time, and if you haven't caught Dr. Huberman, I think he's got more credibility than me right now with his 6 million followers or wherever the hell he's at. And the guy, if you don't know who he is, I mean, check him out on YouTube. I mean, he is just an amazing individual, pumping out a ton of free content for people, and he truthfully does care about individuals having access to science-backed health optimization information, right? That we're not getting from the sources that we should get them from, because if we did, then he probably wouldn't have a podcast. So, that's where he makes his career, is helping people get free access to this information. And so he had a recent podcast about peptides, and I talked about it in mine too as well, but I mentioned him for the credibility, but check it out for yourself. But he talks about these things called lipopolysaccharides, which essentially are contaminants that can happen from research companies. So we call them research companies because that is how they can legally do what they do. And for anybody that's like not even aware, because sometimes people just order them and they're not even thinking about it, go back to the website and look, and you will find in many places, not for human consumption. Not for human consumption, for research only. And many of these companies, and I've been probed these questions from many patients, is like, but they provided third-party studies. And I'm like, that's awesome, right? I could make this in Photoshop too myself, because guess what? There's no and I'm not even that good at Photoshop. Like, there's no governing body over these companies. So they can tell you whatever the flip they want to tell you, and that's it. So this beautiful third party, maybe it's real. And that's the thing. Like, do I think they're all bad? No, it's a gamble. And so if you want to get high quality peptides, you need to get them from a licensed healthcare practitioner, and licensed healthcare practitioners can only prescribe either pharmaceutical agents or peptides that come from a compounding pharmacy. And so in my clinic, I work with these medical practitioners, and they're prescribing peptides that we get from high quality compounding pharmacies, which undergo a ton of scrutiny, not only by the FDA. They're not really regulated by the FDA, but they still have to adhere to FDA guidelines, but they're regulated by state compounding pharmacy boards, right? Each state has their own board in the US. So much significantly higher standards and scrutiny that they need to endure, or they get shut down really fast. And so with what has happened recently among the FDA, in this space, you pretty much have access now to two peptides, Sermorelin and Tesamorelin. So let's talk about those, because you could still get phenomenal results from each of them. So Sermorelin was actually FDA approved. I don't know when it was, I think a while back, for actual growth hormone deficiency medical conditions, right? Both for children and adults, right? So, and GH deficiencies in children is a much bigger issue than it is for adults, because we didn't talk about this too much, but I'll tangent a little quickly, very, very quickly. So growth hormone does a lot of the same stuff for children that it does for adults, all the things that we mentioned. But what's so unique for children is the fact that there's many pieces to it, but specifically the one that pops out to most people is height, right? Growth plates, right? So for your long bones, the growth plates are unsealed. And so growth hormone, we didn't even talk about that earlier, but one of its effects is improving bone density, the mineral content of bones, making them stronger. But for children, it'll make the bones longer. And this is where height comes into play too as well. And like I said, there's many other things it's doing for children that's not doing for adult. But in any case, GH deficiency for children is a horrible issue. And if they're not medicated quickly, there's a timeline to where now they become an adult and now they have permanent height issues and potentially any other issues, maybe joint dysfunction as well, because the cartilaginous material didn't get to develop as well. I haven't specifically read a ton of data in that, but I am familiar with cases like that. So in any case, children or adults, Sermorelin, you can actually, if you have this medical condition, you can get it covered by your insurance. Although it's a rare condition to have true full-blown medical deficiencies of growth hormone. So many people are getting them from like my clinic, for example, clinicians that believe in anti-aging medicine and understand the health concerns with having long-standing lower levels of growth hormone in the body, and the longevity promotions and optimal health that the increases in growth hormone can provide for you. So Sermorelin, tried and true. Now, Tesamorelin, this one's interesting. And if you can afford it, you should absolutely get your hands on it if you have some fat mass to lose. This one's known for being a powerful belly fat burner. And so Tesamorelin is just another version of a growth hormone secretagogue. This one was actually FDA approved for a medical condition known as lipodystrophy. So for AIDS patients specifically. And I don't know if lipodystrophy essentially is synonymous with central adiposity, right? So visceral fat. And we know, and we could tangent on this for a long time, but visceral fat is significantly worse for you than subcutaneous fat. Like by far. This is fat that develops around your organs, or around and so that's central adiposity, measuring your waist. These are all indications of the fat that is significantly, I'm talking 5 to 10 times worse for you than subcutaneous fat, which is fat everywhere else, which is funny because you think about like a person's like view of themselves and aesthetically speaking, it's the subcutaneous fat that affects an individual's appearance, but it's the visceral fat that's killing you. And we know that. That's why the waist to height ratio is just much more potent, a much more potent measurement of and quick indicator of a person's actual health levels. But so tesamorelin is approved for AIDS patients, and I don't know if the central adiposity that an AIDS patient gets is from the medications they're on or just from the AIDS. I don't know. I don't specialize in that. But in any case, there is a lot more lipodystrophy and central adiposity in AIDS patients. And so tesamorelin's approved for that. Again, used in the anti-aging space. And if you have stubborn belly fat, there's a ton of lifestyle choices that we would coach you in as well, because belly fat is usually a hallmark sign of insulin resistance. But if you want a powerful aid and you got the pocket book for it and you want to make that investment, tesamorelin can be a valuable aid for you for sure.
And if I'm on board for all of this, it sounds great to me. I'm not going to use a research company. I'm going to go through the proper channels and actually go through a pharmacy and have a provider and be coached and guided. I still want to maximize my results, and I definitely don't want to waste my money. It's one thing to have access to a therapy. It's another to achieve an actual ROI. And I mean, this from the gym industry. I do too. You'd have people who would throw a lot of money at a problem through treatments, but have absolutely no roadmap, no guideline whatsoever. And all that just becomes is a expensive time span. It's pretty much it. So how can you take this and really make whatever lifestyle changes that are necessary to see the improvements that we talked about today?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. There's so many. I mean, we wouldn't have enough time to cover them all. So going down the list, I think I'm going to do my best to put them in order, in an order that would probably be the most applicable for the most amount of people. Everybody's going to have their own individual situation, but I think number one, changing what you put in your body, right? Changing the quality of the food that you're eating. And there's so many ways that you can dissect this, but keeping it simple, just decreasing the amount of processed foods that you're eating, replacing them with whole nutritious foods, AKA fruits and vegetables and meats, produce, nuts. That's it. Right. And, the perimeter of the grocery store, the higher percentage of your food, because I'm a realist. Right. And so in my lasting weight loss programs, I tell people to strive for 90-10, because even if you do have the ability to go for 100, it ain't going to be 100% clean for the rest of your life. And so, it's got to be sustainable. So, eating as clean as you can. I call it the anti-processed food diet. And this would be paleo Mediterranean would be great categories, but there's probably a ton of foreign food too as well that I'm just not familiar with. And I'm like, look, is it's a fruit, a vegetable, legume, produce, meat, I'm all for it. And if you can afford organic, high quality meats and produce, that's the gold standard, but work within your budget. So I think diet's number one. Now, number two, and this is going to be interesting to a lot of people, but I definitely think the second most important lifestyle strategy and this is the controversial one, is the long fasting. I think regularly long fasting. And I say this because the majority of the world is fat. The majority of the world is obese, and the majority of the world has a ton and has poor metabolic health. And so intermittent fasting is great, but intermittent fasting is just not enough for most people to really move the needle. And so intermittent fasting as a daily, in addition to some sort of weekly longer fast, I think is the missing tool. And this is the protocol that I created, the FLOW protocol, FLOA, fasting like our ancestors. It's the world's most aggressive, prolonged fasting regimen. And then we do this every single day and help patients achieve sustainable, lasting weight loss. And the secret ingredient is the FLOW fasting. So huge fan of that. And I think that that's severely underutilized. And, you know, if you're watching this and you're already at a great weight and a great body fat percentage, okay, fine. Then probably fasting for you is going to be lower on the list, but that's not the majority of people out there. Number 3 is resistance training, because I don't care how much growth hormone peptides you're taking, testosterone, nothing is going to, without the actual stimulus. See, these are all hormones, right? These are all hormones that are going to aid your body's reaction to the stimulus, but you got to have the stimulus. You got to actually give the trigger, which is the resistance training, the stimulus to repair and rebuild and grow muscle tissue. And the benefits of longevity, of enhanced muscle mass, we've talked about that tremendously. So that would absolutely be number 3. Number 4 would be addressing micronutrient deficiencies, right? And this can get very nuanced, and there's a ton of tests out there, right? But rather than, you know, getting into very specific testing, and I used to do this. I did this with patients. That my background is functional medicine. And I don't do that. I actually refer out to the wizard. I call him is Dr. Dan Vitality Health, but I let him do that, you know, and a lot of people, we address their micronutrient deficiencies simply by getting the basics in. You know, the basics are so important. Essential fatty acids, a good amount of magnesium, vitamin D, a broad spectrum multivitamin. Even if you just did those 4, you'd be doing much better than the majority of people out there. And then we can consider curcumin and resveratrol if you are dealing with any inflammatory conditions. But I think that's the basis, right? And then some electrolytes if you're doing the longer fasting. After that, I would say, you know, I'm going to throw in the inflammation category, because I think a lot of people are struggling with inflammatory conditions, PCOS. You become more inflamed when you hit menopause, autoimmune diseases, right? So any of that stuff going on, inflammation category finds itself up there, you know, and you can address this with the curcumin and resveratrol. You can do powerful things like we're a big fan of low dose naltrexone, which is a different usage of the drug called naltrexone. And that's amazing because it's very, very safe and well tolerated by the body, but it has a powerful way of modulating the immune system and reducing inflammation levels. So, you know, LDN's great adjunctive therapy for sure. You know, and then finally, look, we got these last 2 pillars, and they certainly does not mean they're not important, but stress and sleep. I put them at the bottom because I think, again, right, what's going to give the most amount of people the most bang for their buck? I think more people are struggling with the categories in the front, but by no means, and make no mistake, either lack of quality sleep or unhandled stress can ruin anybody's health and could kill them very fast. So, and they're similar in the fact that they both relate to a cortisol issue, but they're handled obviously very differently. And so figuring out how to handle your stress better and then optimizing your sleep levels, I think, you know, these are the tenets of optimal health and lasting weight loss. And if you're going to make the investment to incorporate growth hormone peptides and any other agents, get the damn basics in, you know, get these basics in. It's silly, you know, it really is silly. And this is why I launched this recent program, because, you know, the reality of healthcare in this country is, you know, you got to be rich to get the best holistic therapies. And that's sad. It really is. But because insurance companies don't cover it, because the amount of time that you have to spend with somebody in a true clinical setting is high, it's expensive. So I've recently launched these group coachings, these group health coaching groups for as low as $10 a month. And I'm really excited about that because I think a lot of people will be successful if they had a community, if they had an opportunity to get on a Zoom with me. Even though it's a group, they're not going to get that one-on-one attention. I think having the community, having the support, having the guidance, getting some questions answered is tremendously more effective for them, because information is only as important as the ability to implement it, right? And I mean, it's crazy when you think about it, but anybody can go to YouTube and get the answer to any question they possibly could even think of asking. You could graduate with a PhD from YouTube. I mean, you really can. But how many people are doing that, by the way? Because your ability to sift through the data and sift through the information and, passing certain topics that are too difficult for you to learn and needing help with that particular topic halts your ability to then further learn more complex topics. And so anyways, not to rabbit hole too much, but I because of the importance of lifestyle choices, I'm really excited for that Flow Lifestyle group that I just launched. And bringing it all back to your question, these are the tenets that are going to really maximize an individual's results.
Absolutely. And before I let you sign off and get back to your ridiculously busy lifestyle, I get this question so often. So I just know that the viewers and the watchers are going to appreciate this, because I know it's probably rattling around in their domes. The benefits of utilizing what we talked about last week, growth hormone peptides, specifically BPC 157, in conjunction with growth hormone peptides, and what you can expect to see from a results perspective there.
Yeah, what's really interesting is BPC 157 will actually enhance an individual's sensitivity to growth hormone. It has some particular characteristics about it, where it's acting on the receptor site, and essentially, for all intents and purposes, making your dose of growth hormone peptides be more effective, whether that's 50% or 100% or two. I mean, I don't know. I don't think we do know, but we do know that the potential for better effects from whether it's peptides or just lifestyle choices, BPC 157 can enhance that. And, it's unfortunate that that's much harder peptide to get your hands on now.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts for anyone that's listening to this and is really considering taking this growth hormone secretagogue journey? Any special considerations or any recommendations that you feel would be helpful, knowing that you've been there, done that, been around this stuff, and know more about it than most other people?
Yeah, I think nothing different than what we said, but just kind of summarizing it. Number one, find a licensed healthcare practitioner, a clinic that provides support, whether it's with us or someone like us, just to ensure that you do it safely, that you do it right. Number two, having a conversation and establishing whether growth hormone peptides are the right starting point is part of what you would get from a good clinic, right? And I think ethically speaking, you're going to find clinics that are just going to sell you regardless, and they don't even care, So it's important. It's important that you start your path in with what is most important for your body. And again, what comes to mind is a metabolic wreck, an obese, one of these medical conditions. I really do think that growth hormone is not the first thing that we're thinking of, and something more like tirzepatide actually comes to mind as the best option to utilize and consider first. And so, just again, making sure that it makes sense for you with where you're at and your goals. Making sure lab work is done. A lot of people are not getting proper lab work, and no one's looking at IGF or prolactin, which is very, very rare, but prolactinoma would be a severe contraindication. Active cancer, stay away. We don't know that this is going to aggravate your cancer, but it's just one of those things where mechanistically it makes sense that growth hormone is a growth process, and the definition of cancer is an uncontrolled cellular growth. And so I think fasting, another thing that I talked about that I didn't talk about, and why I love to incorporate fasting for growth hormone with growth hormone usage, even for the hard gainers, who are the people that have to be constantly eating, and so they're looking for growth hormone. It's like, why would you, and let's say they are using it maximally for a long period of time. Well, think about what fasting does. Fasting is the opposite of growth. It's the breakdown, but it's the healthy breakdown, cellular autophagy.
Mm-hmm.
And so cellular autophagy, by definition, when you get into the nuance of what's actually happening on a cellular level, this is the opposite of what leads to cancer. Cancer is this, and I'm not an oncologist, and I'm not even trying to say I'm an expert in this, but it's this uncontrolled cellular growth with many, many pieces of the etiology of it to the starting point of it. But it's the cells losing its ability to keep things clean and keep things in order, and the cellular debris builds up, and then you have this senescence process that happens where cells begin to break down over time, and many other pieces go into that. So if I'm going to recommend, especially long-term use for growth hormone, I think you have to consider, just from a safety perspective, to balance it out with some opportunities for your body to do the opposite of growth, which is clean house, breakdown, cellular autophagy, and fasting is still, in my opinion, the most potent stimulus of cellular autophagy.
Definitely feel like I need to go work out now. Great stuff, Dr. Jones, as always. Love doing this. Can't wait to do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk soon.
All right.
If you guys found this informative, then you're going to want to click this video right there. It's a continued explanation of what you learned today, guys. Knowledge is power, so let's keep this going. We'll see you later.